So there's been all sorts of recent talks about a PlayStation 5 Pro mid-generation refresh that's currently in development. Now, this particular news article came from Insider Gaming earlier in the week, and this confirms, and I'm using air quotes, confirms that a PS5 Pro is in development according to their sources and is probably coming out in 2024, again, according to Insider Gaming. They go on to say in the article that this is just the beginning of new hardware coming to PlayStation users this generation, said one source when talking about the detachable disk drive console. As for what the PS5 Pro specs will entail, details are limited. However, a recently published patent by PlayStation architect Mark Cerny suggests that Sony Interactive Entertainment is looking to accelerate ray tracing performance in video games. Just like with the PS4 to the PS4 Pro, we can generally guess pretty confidently that the PlayStation 5 Pro will have increased visuals, performance, and speeds, but as for leak details, we will have to wait until a later date to release those. So let's go ahead and talk about this story in some detail, because I personally believe that a PS5 Pro does not exist, and I question the sources that Insider Gaming has been talking to about this particular story. This may be a polarizing discussion, so I want to mention who I am and my credentials, especially for those that are new to this channel or watching for the first time or not familiar with who I am. I've worked in the video game industry since 2019 as a professional game developer. I've worked and shipped 4 PlayStation 5 titles with additional titles along the way. I'm very familiar with its development. I'm very familiar with the PlayStation 5 hardware since early 2021. And as mentioned, I've shipped games. I'm familiar with the PlayStation 5 in terms of its capabilities, its strengths, and its limitations. So some of us may just be assuming that a PS5 Pro is inevitable 3 years after the launch of the PlayStation 5, thanks to the precedent that was set in the old generation or the previous generation of the PS4 and PS4 Pro era. But let's go ahead and look at this, because if we go back in history and think about the PS4 and the Xbox One when they launched in 2013, they were initially targeting 1080p visuals. Now, while some games were able to hit that resolution, the underpowered AMD Jaguar cores were already a bottleneck, and it became very apparent that native 1080p gaming was an outlier and was not the norm. Recall that the Xbox One, many games would run at 720p, and on the PlayStation 4, games would target around 900p. So why are we then talking about the bad old days of the launch of the Xbox One and PS4? Well, there was a shift in consumer-grade televisions around 2015, 2016, where 4K televisions were becoming a standard and very affordable. You could walk into a Best Buy and pick up a 4K television for around, at the time, around $600, $700, probably cheaper depending if you looked close enough, but 4K televisions were becoming quite affordable, and 2016 was considered the year of 4K TVs. It was also a time where PC GPUs were supporting 4K with good frame rates. And we're talking about the NVIDIA 1080, 1080 Ti, the 1070s. They were pushing 4K visuals. Of course, they weren't, doing 4K with max settings, but they were definitely hitting 4K and running PC games at good frame rates all the way back in 2016, which seems like a long time ago. Now, in 2016, Xbox One and PS4 could barely hold on. And this was a very weird time during video games where 60 FPS gaming didn't even seem to be a key performance indicator for either camp. It was all about the resolution for some reason. So the PlayStation 4 Pro released in 2016 in November, and it was desperately needed because those people that had bought a brand spanking new 4K television were disappointed at the visuals and performance, and a necessary change was needed. It bridged the gap and made 4K TV consumers very happy. And remember, we're talking about a lot of people purchasing 4K TVs in 2016. Now, the PS4 Pro did target 2160p or 4K, but of course, that was not a native resolution in many, many games. We were talking about the introduction of things like HDR, checkerboard reconstruction, dynamic resolutions. But the point is, when you plugged in a PlayStation 4 Pro into your 4K TV, you had a display output of 4K or 2160p. Fast forward to today, 2023, the PS5 Pro just doesn't make sense in the same way, because for me, there is no use case that warrants a PS5 Pro other than people just saying, I want more power. Now, if I was to ask you guys what you want to see with a PS5 Pro, most people would say, well, I want 8K output or maybe native 4K gaming at a locked 60 or 120 FPS, maybe better ray tracing support or possibly a hardware-based AI reconstruction method. These are very compelling arguments, but how much better would the end result be in terms of visual fidelity than a base PS5? When we talk about the differences in fidelity between a PS4 and a PS4 Pro, they were fairly significant. Most PS5 and Xbox Series games are already targeting 60 FPS, and in some cases are targeting 120 FPS. And other than ray tracing, which for me is a bit of a hard sell, especially when we talk about a hardware upgrade that is in the same way to a PS4 to a PS4 Pro, it just doesn't really fit the same mold for me. So then the discussion turns to 8K TVs, and 8K TVs, while they are getting cheaper, are still out of reach for the average consumer, especially those who want to play video games. I personally don't know of anyone who owns an 8K TV. Now, that's not to say that 8K isn't going to, take over in, 5 or 6 years, but I don't believe that by this time next year that 8K is going to be something that takes over the video game landscape in the same way as 4K televisions did. And look, the reality is we've seen many first-party PlayStation titles look stunning on the PS5. And in many ways, it's fair to say that this generation has only just begun in 2023. We've only yet to see what the PS5 is capable of when the shackles come off. 2023 has Final Fantasy 16 and Marvel's Spider-Man 2. These are massive exclusive PlayStation 5 games that really does outline the beginning of this generation for me. Before 2023, most first-party PS5 titles began their development on PlayStation 4 development hardware. And we're only finally starting to see what developers can do with the PlayStation 5. And I want to be clear, they weren't being held back by the PS4. They were just working with what they had. And in 2023, while the PS4 and PS4 Pro finally fades away in the rearview mirror, I think games like Spider-Man 2 will really showcase what the PlayStation 5 can do. So for me, the PS5 Pro just doesn't really make sense. Now, of course, as a developer, I want to see new hardware. I always will say, yes, I want to see new hardware, but this also gives me some pause that the idea of a PS5 Pro would be introduced, because we've seen the increases that it takes to make games in 2023. We're talking many, many years to develop and ship games out. And what we're talking about here is adding a new SKU into the life cycle of the PlayStation 5, and that can only complicate matters even more, because all of a sudden now we have to target 2 SKUs, and we've already seen some of the issues that we've experienced with the Xbox Series S. I'm not talking about the notion that it's holding games back or it's holding next gen back, because I think that is an absurd thing to say. But what I'm talking about is when you introduce a new piece of hardware into the mix, then all of a sudden your games have to support all of them, which means that more time needs to be taken to ensure that your games are running at a good level of performance everywhere. That's what certification is there for. And introducing a new SKU into the mix is only going to complicate things even further. And if we go back and look at the Xbox for a minute, it followed suit with an Xbox One X, a mid-season Pro model, just in the same way as the PS4 Pro. And if they were to follow suit with a Xbox Series XL or an Xbox Series X Pro, we're talking about 3 SKUs in the Xbox generation. And my fellow game developers are probably pulling their hair out thinking about that. And I can tell you that this would not be a good thing. It would only increase development time. It would only increase cost. And it would be very, very difficult, almost impossible, to provide accurate release dates and schedules to release games. And it would increase the likelihood of delays. And I think at the end of the day, both Sony and Microsoft will continue to support what they have. In other words, they'll offer features that are currently available that help games look and play better without the need for expensive upgrades. We're talking about VRR support, 120 hertz. Things are already in play, but taking more advantage of those things. Reduced input latency, ray tracing, better reconstruction techniques. faster loading speeds. All these things are out of the box on both, and developers are going to continue to support these. We're going to see some really cool advancements now that the shackles are off with last generation, and developers are really starting to just natively target PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series consoles. Now, with that all said, I do want to stress that Sony is going to continue to iterate on existing PlayStation 5 hardware, possibly offering a die shrink and a slim model at some point that would smooth out some areas of the hardware. And of course, in the lab, in the R&D lab, they're continuing advancements in technology, because this is what Sony and Microsoft do. They don't stop when you release a console. They're always iterating. They're always developing prototypes. They're always developing the next thing. And for me, I don't dispute that part of this discussion. But personally, I feel like the PlayStation 5 is a one and done deal this generation, in the same way that I feel like the Xbox Series S and X is a one and done deal this generation for Microsoft. The hardware is good. There's nothing wrong with the PlayStation 5. It's very powerful, and I personally believe it can outlast this generation and go for many, many years. And then when 8K televisions in, say, 2028 or so are really affordable and available to the average consumer, then we'll see the next generation of PlayStation hardware offer resolution or an 8K solution. But we are going to leave it here for today's episode, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked it, leave me a comment below. Let me know your thoughts about the PS5 Pro rumors in the comments below. I definitely want to hear what you guys have to say. But as always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Bye for now.